could be set up with a few $100s, and even with sophisticated software, it could be well under $1,000. Compared with the cost of telecommunication satellites, fax on demand and the telephone provide your organization with a very cost-effective and very powerful means of communication. Telecommunication satellites require much more expensive and elaborate technical capabilities, although they can deliver video, which is not always easy to do through the telephone. On average, broadcasting on telecommunication satellites costs about $500 to $800 an hour. Given the cost of additional equipment and technical personnel at the sending and receiving end, the phone and fax may be an attractive alternative for your telecommunications needs. A fax and phone combination may sound attractive to us given their user-friendliness and low cost. However, the global internet is getting less expensive and more user-friendly every day. Furthermore, today, the internet, by making electronic mail, document, and graphic sharing possible, has brought a new level of sophistication to global interactivity, enabling the individual to communicate via powerful means. The June 1995 issue of Business Week magazine, devoted to information technology, reported a recent survey of companies conducted by the market researcher Yankee Group, in which it was reported that of all the companies surveyed are currently using or planning to use information technology in the following areas. For internal communications, 30% currently are using internet and 14% are planning to use it later on. For external communications, 49% are currently using it and 27% are planning to use it later. For advertising, 8% are currently using and 33% are planning to use it, and for selling products, 5% versus 35%. Among all the new media, the World Wide Web is the most dynamic one. So far the web has been primarily used for sharing documents in a hypertext environment. In other words, you can click on a hot word and it will take you to another computer server elsewhere in the world in which additional information related to that particular word can be found. The web, however, is bound to go through a drastic change in the near future. With the use of new browser plug-in software such as Shockwave, or totally new server and browser technologies such as Java, the web is bound to become ever more exciting and interesting. These new software will provide a level of interactivity to the web which so far has not been possible. In the near future, you could not only receive information from the web, but feed the web information which would become part of a worldwide database. Moreover, the new technologies of Shockwave and Java will bring the capabilities of interactive multimedia to the web, capabilities which so far have been only available on the CD-ROM. For example, using Shockwave, you can put almost any interactive multimedia software created in Macromedia Director authoring tool on the World Wide Web. This is an example of a Shockwave movie played within the Netscape browser, enabling me to click on a button and branch out to other parts of the software, respond to questions or comments, or provide feedback to the user. Another innovation which is bound to change the workplace as well as where work can take place is wireless communications. Radio and the use of radio for telephony is not a new technology. It has been around for many years, since the early 1900s. However, a group of new products and telecommunication services promise that telecommuting becomes less and less an experimental strategy and more a mainstream work style. A combination of mobile telephone networks, VSATs, or very small aperture terminals, and laptop computers have made it possible for government officials, law enforcement agencies, as well as business professionals to work as they travel or move from one company location to another. For example, several pioneering companies such as Pacific Bell in California and American Express worldwide are experimenting with telecommuting and mobile offices. New wireless services range from the familiar cordless telephones to mobile cellular phones, global mobile phones service, global positioning satellites, and pagers that can be one-way or two-way, and personal digital assistants. Literally, sky is the limit. Another new innovation is the cable modem. Recently, cable companies in several test markets have introduced a digital interface for the cable television network. This will open another well-entrenched telecommunication system in which electrons can move books, newspapers, manuals, and job aids to people, not to mention movies and videos on demand. About 25 years ago, one of the most popular concepts among media specialists was the paperless office. Past technology giants such as Wang Computers introduced early versions of automated offices. However, computer and telecommunication systems, in fact, not only did not bring about the paperless society, but they generated more paper and paperwork. Today, many government organizations and businesses have to work with less resources while increase their productivity. Many have realized that their highly trained workforce spends most of their time doing paperwork instead of doing the job they were trained for and hired to do. For example, a study quoted in Peter Drucker's book, Post-Capitalist Society, indicated that in some hospitals, anywhere from 2/3 to 3/4 of a nurse's time is devoted to filling out insurance forms, internal hospital forms, and government compliance forms. In the early 1980s, several businesses such as Walmart, a nationwide retail chain in the United States, started to use the computer to reduce paperwork for its sales force and increase its sales. An innovation of Walmart was just-in-time inventory, which alerted the manufacturers of products sold in Walmart stores by providing them with a continuous update on the sale of items at the checkout counter. Thus, as the customer bought a product, the manufacturer became aware of the market demand for its products almost instantly. Today, among other organizations, hospitals try to use a centralized management information system to reduce paperwork by storing the information about their patients in databases that can be used for multiple purposes, from sending forms to insurance companies, to ordering drugs to a hospital's pharmacy, and sending information to physicians about the patient's conditions. For example, nurses in a Wisconsin-based healthcare center use personal data assistants to check the doses of drugs prescribed for each patient and put new orders to the pharmacy, thus increasing time for patient care and reducing time on paperwork. This new innovation to reduce organizational paperwork is called Electronic Data Interchange, or EDI. Information Week magazine, in its October 2, 1995 issue, reported that EDI over the Internet is rapidly gaining popularity among businesses and industries as well as government organizations for exchanging purchase orders and invoices. EDI will increase in popularity as secure systems become available on the Internet so that companies and government agencies can exchange data without compromising the privacy of their clients or their own proprietary information. Another innovative strategy for data communication and information on demand within companies and government organizations is intranet. In a special report published in its February 22, 1996 issue, Business Week magazine explained this new strategy. Intranets, or private nets use the infrastructure and standards of the Internet and the World Wide Web, but are cordoned off from the public Internet through software programs called firewalls. Employees can venture out onto the net, but unauthorized users can't come in. Business Week's report suggests that this strategy could be the simple solution to company-wide information on demand. As secure data lines on the Internet and public switched networks become available, paperless money and paperless banking will also become a reality. Several banks in the United States have already started to offer new services and features by which customers can pay their bills using an ordinary telephone or a simple software on a personal computer. To make user interface easier and the net more affordable and accessible, Byte magazine, in its March 1996 issue, reported that several manufacturers are developing a low-cost network computer. Companies currently producing or developing these so-called appliances, which will be sold for about $500, include IBM, Sun Microsystems, Apple, Oracle, Silicon Graphics, LSI Logic, and Acorn Computer. How popular or practical these devices will be remains to be seen. But one thing is certain, and that is that the race to place powerful and practical information technologies in the hands of the ordinary users has begun. The web PC, or the network-centric computer, could be the first of many appliance computer devices which would bring ease of use, portability, and affordability to practically everyone. If you are interested to read more about the impact of these new technologies on society in general and on government and business in particular, I recommend a highly readable book called Being Digital, written by Nicholas Negroponte, who is the director of the Media Lab at MIT. Now I will break for some of your questions.
Let's begin the first question and answer session. We will try to answer as many questions as possible. Therefore, we ask that only one question be asked per phone call, and that these questions be as brief as possible. You may call the studio directly at the phone numbers or fax which now appear on your screen. We remind you to make your phone calls at a distance from the monitor to avoid feedback. We have our first call. It is from FENALCO, the Federación Nacional de Comerciantes in Medellín. Welcome. Your question, please.
Buenos días.
Buenos días.
Nuestra pregunta es la
Our
siguiente.
question is as follows.
Las ideas de Alvin
The
Toffler
ideas
del
that
cambio
are
social
Toffler's ideas about societal change that derive from the technological development are applicable in the United States, but from your perspective, do you think that this theory can be applied to other countries? And if possible, can you explain what would be the appropriate process for this?
Dr. Saba?
Sure. Yes, the ideas advocated by Toffler, of course, came about 16, 17 years ago, and they were applicable to industrialized countries. But more and more, we see the same trends in developing countries as well. So I don't think that they are exclusive to the United States. I think they are applicable elsewhere in the world. In fact, the ideas are global.
We have a call now from Mexico, from the Universidad Autónoma de Tamaulipas. Your question, please.
Buenos días.
Good morning. The question is the following. What response does the new technology offer in order to solve the problem of the great number of workers that are displaced or laid off? And also, what's going to happen with those workers where the technological development is way under that of the industrialized countries?
A challenging question.
Yes, this is a very good question, excellent question, as a matter of fact. new technologies may take some jobs away from older industrial plants, but they also create new jobs. Every day we see startup organizations, new companies developing and bringing new products, new services to the market. So that's a major new trend, smaller organizations creating new products.
We have a question now from Brazil, Servicio Brasileiro in Minas Gerais. Your question, please.
Su pregunta, por favor.
Yes, I would like to ask Mr. Saba, which aspects should the small and medium enterprises take into account when choosing the most appropriate technology to provide themselves with access to the right information in the right time, yet remaining competitive? It is important to emphasize that small and medium enterprises often have a shortage of financial resources. Sí, gracias.
Okay. The right choices at the right time.
Another good question. I think the key there is the need of your organization, the need of the people who work in your organization. If you take your cue from them and find out what do they need to know, what kind of information they need to have access to, that would be a primary guideline. The other issue of cost and matching the cost of new technology with the needs of the organization is also important. I think there you can use a number of technologies that are not very expensive. The ordinary telephone or the internet, if you have access to that, they are not very expensive. They are very reasonably priced.
And that will vary with circumstances considerably.
Sure.
Mm-hmm. We have another question from Mexico, the Universidad Nacional Autónoma de México in Mexico DF. Your question, please.
Morning. We have three questions. First, how have the high executives assimilated their role change in the decision-making process? And the second question would be, in a private enterprise, do you have to have human beings, emerging human beings, when the information systems is down, or and while you wait for the computers to be up again? What emergency personnel, not emergent. That's what they mean. And the third question is backup people for emergency situations. Okay, and then what's the third question? For microenterprises or small enterprises, how can you avoid having to make large investments on equipment that would become obsolete? That's all. Thank you.
Three good questions.
Yes, indeed.
Okay. The changing role of executives in decision-making.
Well, it's difficult for top executives to change their roles. Of course, in the new flat organization where there is the chief executive officer and then there are the frontline workers, there is no middle manager, and that changes the role of the top executive. A lot of executives have realized that. They have adopted their style to that. Those who cannot simply have to either learn or change their job.
And the question of backup emergency systems for when a system goes down.
That's one of the downsides of technology. When it is not functional, it doesn't function, and so therefore you need to establish some backup systems. You need to have some alternatives to the current technology that you're using. For example, you need to team up with other organizations to invest in some emergency backup computers or other alternative technologies.
And the question of small enterprises and the choices facing them.
Well, fortunately, the Internet is providing smaller organizations the same capacity and the same visibility of larger organizations. For example, if you have your web page, your home page on the World Wide Web, you are equal to a multinational corporation. Everybody will have access to it.
Mm-hmm. We have a question now from Peru, the Instituto Nacional de Investigación y Capacitación de Telecomunicaciones in Lima, Peru. Your question, please.
Regarding Alvin Toffler's thoughts, how would the new tool be introduced? The new tool called knowledge in countries such as Peru. And is it possible, for instance, for this second wave Toffler talks about to be just skipped here altogether? And do you think we can just go directly onto the third wave? Is that possible?
Dr. Saba.
Dr. Saba?
Well, Mike, I hope that you will help me in answering some of these very, very interesting questions. I think what is happening now is a change in the paradigm of knowledge. I think that in the Industrial Revolution and in the scientific revolution of the 16th and the 17th century, most of the developing countries were barred from participating in the creation of new knowledge, in the generation of new knowledge. But as we are moving towards the third wave culture, I think ironically the developing countries will find themselves more and more in line with the new scientific paradigm. Mm-hmm. So they will definitely have a role in generation of new knowledge.
Marshall McLuhan used to talk about the opportunity that countries have which have not heavily invested in the 19th century industrial technologies and have all of those plants in place to in effect jump some stages of development and come into the communication era,
right,
with less baggage and more efficiency. Though one sees very mixed results, it seems to me, in many of the cities throughout the developing world, where you have combinations of factors creating over-urbanization, that communication itself may, over time, balance off.
That's true. In some developing countries where they did not have a very well-entrenched telephone system, they jumped into fiber optics. Mm-hmm. And so, for example, in Saudi Arabia, they have a wide fiber optic network where they did not have a prior investment in their telephone system.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. We have a question now from Guadalajara, the Universidad de Guadalajara in Jalisco. Your question, please.
Good morning. I am calling you from the University of Guadalajara in Puerto Vallarta. What do you think is the time frame that one should expect to be able to have available a complete network of satellites, low altitude satellites? And could you mention several cutting-edge advantages that we would be able to derive from that? And we hope you visit us in Puerto Vallarta.
Would love to.
Well, we hope so.
Nos encantaría visitarlo.
The low orbiting satellites, their time frame and implications.
New satellites are launched every month. Sometimes, unfortunately, accidents happen and their launch is delayed, but this is now a monthly event. New satellites are going up one after another, and so therefore I think that the VSATs will be available to a lot of organizations that prior to their launch could not have access to them. The cost would have been prohibitive.
Mm-hmm. And now we have a question from Panama, from the Universidad Tecnológica de Panama. Welcome. Your question, please.
Buenos días. ¿Qué elementos
What elements or criteria
deben tomar en cuenta
do you think should be taken into account by the executives of the
en los países
businesses or corporations in the developing countries in order to justify
sustentar la inversión
their investment in these new technologies?
What elements in a developing context to justify?
I think in that respect, a developing country and a industrialized country really does not make all that much difference. The cost justification for investment directly relates to how the new technology can help your employees to learn, to increase their skills, and bring about a situation that they would be able to generate new knowledge.
Mm-hmm. It's a complex question that has lots of possible ramifications.
True.
We have a question now from Sonora, from the Comisión Federal de Electricidad en División Noreste, Hermosillo. Your question, please. Hermosillo?
Is the most important one.
Bueno,
No, hable por favor.
ya.
La pregunta.
Bueno, buenos días.
Good morning.
Buenos días.
Les felicito por los datos.
I want to congratulate you for this wonderful video conference. You're saying that the new production paradigm, which is globalization, has given rise to a massive layoffs, like, for example, the 10,000 employees that you mentioned by Pacific Bell having been laid off. And this has happened in many businesses around the world. And so what happens with the people who have been laid off, and how does this impact the social welfare and the economic welfare, for instance, in Mexico, in the world over?
This is a question that we have been talking about among ourselves here as well. In many ways, it's a horrible thing, but there are other ways of thinking about it as well.
Well, and frankly, there is no good answer to this question. However, I think it would be informative for us if we compare the situation that we have today with what we had when we made the transition from the agricultural society into the industrial society. If I may give the example of the United States, in the agricultural era in the States, we had 80 to 85% of the population involved in agriculture. Today, we have only 2% of the population involved in agriculture. And so, therefore, I bet if we go to the newspapers of those days, you would find stories that would say that where all these farmers that are displaced are going to find jobs because of mechanization of agriculture. Well, they found their jobs in the same factories that were making the mechanized units for agriculture. And so therefore I think that those people who are now displaced from the industrial organizations will find jobs in the same organizations that are automating those industrial plants.
This is a period of transition, which is always a difficult adjustment. There's
Indeed.
lots of displacement.
Indeed.
But that opportunities should replace the losses over time. We have a question from Guanajuato, Instituto Tecnológico de Celaya. Your question, please.
Sí, estamos haciendo una pregunta de parte del ingeniero.
We're calling This is engineer Gabriel Monteverde calling from Mexico, and the question is as follows. Given the loss of jobs, could the unions begin to reject this new culture that is coming up, or and on the other hand, how would we approach this? How should we see this?
Dr. Saba?
The reaction of unions are mixed. Some unions are not supporting the new technology. They remind us of the dangers, of the difficulties, of the pain in society. Some more progressive unions have empowered their employees, or rather their membership, to learn the new technology and have invested in new training programs for their rank and file.
Unions face a difficult problem of the short term versus the long term, and the far-sighted unions will provide for the long term with such programs.
Definitely.
But it's difficult. A question from the Instituto Tecnológico de Tepic. Your question, please.
I would like to make a comment here that if developing industrialized countries are always on the cutting edge of all of these new techniques and technologies and training, don't you think that this would create in a way some kind of imbalance vis-a-vis the underdeveloped or developing countries, especially if you consider the free trade agreements, and that this is opening up a further gap and we will never be able to compensate and to balance off all these markets?
Are we getting closer together or further apart with this?
Well, there are several ways to respond to this question. Number one is that we have the same imbalances here in industrialized countries. Technology is not available to all sectors of the society equally here in the United States either. So those questions are as important for us in industrialized countries as well as in other countries. Another way of responding to this question is that the workers in industrialized countries have also the same question when it goes to propositions such as the free trade agreement. They argue, how can they compete in a global economy where the wages in other countries are lower than the wages that they traditionally earned in rather developed countries. So we're going through a rapid transition which is global in nature. There are no good answers to any of these questions. I think that we just have to think creatively and bring as many people as possible into the decision-making process so that we can resolve these issues.
It appears that the traditional gap between the information-rich and the information-poor, not only between different countries, but within any given country, is a problem that we're going to have to keep addressing and that needs a lot of attention as the new technologies make information literacy even more important. Lest we polarize our society, we all face a real challenge on this. We have a question from Panama, from the Universidad Tecnológico de Panama. Your question, please.
Could you elaborate a little more on the intranet concept, and the benefits that can be derived from the applications to the banking market?
Banking and the intranet.
Okay. Well, intranet is an extension of internet within the organization. And if you address the management information system managers in large organizations, you will find out that traditionally they have had difficulty distributing information to everyone in the organization. Intranet is a very good system to provide information to everyone within the organization at a very low cost and efficiently.
We have a question from the state of Tabasco. Pemex Exploración y Producción en Comacaco. Your question, please.
Esta pregunta, the question is as follows. For government enterprises and agencies, what reforms are there being carried out in the United States that will eliminate the actual signature documents and to use only email? In other words, an electronic signature.
Excellent question.
Muy buena pregunta.
Yes. There are companies now working on securing the internet so that you would be able to have transactions over the internet, as well as providing signatures that are particular to one person. So you would be able to do your banking on the internet, as well as be able to endorse documents. This is a new development, and it is not well in place now, but I suppose that we could expect something within the next 6 months to a year.
Let us continue now with Module 2, in which Dr. Saba describes the face of the new streamlined organization, also the nature of management and productivity within it. He examines the transition from the old linear instructional system design model for training and development to the new nonlinear self-organizing models of quality performance in open systems. New knowledge is the currency of the information society. How can we transform our employees and ourselves into effective learners, innovators, and collaborators?
Re-engineering, downsizing, or right-sizing has had a deep effect on organizations which have gone through these processes. By looking at the trends in the past 2 years, it seems that the larger the organization, the more it has had to modify itself to cope with the changes brought about by telecommunication and information technologies. For example, big organizations like AT&T went through a major reorganization process. AT&T divided itself into 3 new companies. Like biological organisms, organizations can grow only to a certain size. When cells in your body grow beyond their optimal size, they divide into 2 or more cells. This seems to be true about organizations as well. Technologies of telecommunications and computing allow organizations to reach new productivity goals and grow rapidly. But by the same token, when they reach a certain size, reorganization is inevitable. The flow diagram on your screen shows the dynamic relationship in the use of technology and organizational growth. The assumption here is that more deployment of technology will lead to growth. The second diagram indicates that the need for reorganization after the growth has surpassed an optimal level. Project managers in media companies in San Diego, for example, prefer to work in small organizational